3D Touch was one of the big innovations introduced with the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus, and essentially it allows the user to press with various degrees of force, and the phone then detects that and responds accordingly. Two main ways working with that as developers, and the first is peek and pop, which is what we're going to look at in this video, and then we'll look at quick actions in the next. Peek and pop work like this. Essentially, if you're in your email app, for example, you can press reasonably hard on one of the emails to see the peek view controller appear, which is a little kind of sneak preview of the email content. And then if you want to read the email itself, then you push even harder and then the email appears. So it's actually a reasonably straightforward thing to implement programmatically. So let's see how it's done. So we'll go over to Xcode and create a new project. This is going to be a peek and pop demo. Save it in the usual place. And we're going to keep this fairly simple. Essentially, we're going to create two new view controllers, and one will be the peek view controller and the other will be the pop view controller. And that's essentially how peek and pop works. So this is a view controller all in itself, and of course this full screen one is a more familiar type of view controller for us. So I'm not actually going to put any content in our new view controllers. I'm just going to drag them in. There we go, and have them there in our app, and we will need classes for them. So they are a subclass of UI view controller, and we'll have peek view controller. And we'll also have, of course, pop view controller. There we go. Then we'll set these up. So this one will be our peek view controller, and this one our pop. All right, here we go. So the first thing we need to do is to detect whether the user is on a device that supports Force Touch. And we do that over in the viewDidLoad method on our initial view controller. And we do it by checking for if trait collection dot force touch capability is equal to UI force touch capability dot available with a small a in Swift 3, then we're good to go essentially. So a trait collection is an object that gives us access to some of the features of the device, in this case force touch capability. So if that's not true, then we won't be able to do whatever it is that we were planning to do. So we'll just print force touch not available. But if it is, we need to prepare the device for potentially doing peek and pop. And we do that using register for previewing with a delegate. And the delegate is just the view controller or self. And the source view is the view, i.e. this bit here, the bit contained within the view controller that the user can see. Now you'll notice we've got an error here because the view controller does not conform to expected type UI view controller previewing delegate. And normally we would add a delegate in that case, but what we do this time, peek and pop works slightly different, and we add an extension to our view controller with a type of UI view controller previewing delegate. So this is essentially another way of adding a delegate. And you can see we've now lost that error there because we've added this UI view controller previewing delegate extension to our view controller. But we've still got an error here because we haven't implemented the necessary methods yet. So there are essentially two methods that we need, one for peek and the other for pop. So let's do peek first, and we'll look for the view controller for location. That's what we're after. So this is a previewing context method, which essentially is the method that is called when the user tries to peek. And what we want to do is when the user does that, we want to jump to the peek view controller. So we need to have a variable referring to that. So we'll call it peek view controller. And we get this from the storyboard. And then we're going to instantiate a view controller. And this is a view controller with identifier. So let's go over and give it an identifier. It was this one. And we put the identifier in the storyboard ID. And I'll go for peek view controller and then copy it to the clipboard. And then back over to our initial view controller. And then we can put peek view controller as the identifier for the view controller that we want to use for the preview or the peek. And you can see that this method expects to return a UI view controller, and the UI view controller that we're going to return is peek view controller. So that's just quite a long-winded way of saying that when the user peeks, we want to jump to the peek view controller. And then we do the same thing for pop. This time we look for commit view controller. There it is, that one there. So it's a similar method. We've got previewing context here as before, but this time we're looking for the view controller to commit. So this is when we do the hard press and we want to actually show the user the data that they've requested. And then we do something pretty similar. So this time we create a pop view controller, which again is storyboard.instantiate view controller with identifier. Let's give it an identifier. So in the storyboard ID, we'll call it pop view controller, and then pop that in there. This time, however, you can see we don't actually return a view controller here. We have a choice of things that we can do, and what we're going to do is show the view controller. So pop view controller with a sender of self, i.e. the current view controller. And we do need to force unwrap that. We're pretty safe there. I know that that view controller exists, so we're not going to get a crash. And that's it. So we've checked for the existence of 3D Touch on the device that it's being run. If it is available, then we'll register for previewing. And then we've created our UI view controller previewing delegate with two methods, the view controller for location, which gives us our peek view controller, and the view controller to commit, which gives us our pop view controller. And that's pretty much it. I can't run it on the simulator and I don't have an iPhone 6S, unfortunately, so I can't show you it in action. But hopefully you're fairly clear on what will happen when we run this app on a device with Force Touch. A small press on this screen will jump to this view controller as a kind of preview, like this. And then pressing harder on that will display the pop view controller. All right, so pretty straightforward. Now we're going to create some quick actions, which is the second major use for Force Touch with the iPhone 6S.